Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Taking the coal out of the Christmas stocking, this week COVID-19 supercharges e-commerce. But what does a surge of online shopping mean for our carbon footprint? And are you dreaming of a green Christmas? Don't despair, our team has your list for environmentally friendly gifts. Plus, the world's largest furniture retailer wants to be climate positive by 2030. But how? We speak to the CEO. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern in London, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now, the shops shut for much of the year. COVID-19 has brought unprecedented disruption to the world of retail. But how are companies and shoppers themselves adapting to the pandemic? Here's the data behind the holiday rush.
There are many things retailers would like to forget about 2020, but the new rhythm of the holiday shopping season won't be one of them. Cyber Monday accounted for $10.8 billion in online spending this year. That's a 15% increase from last year, but fell short of an initial projection of almost $13 billion. Black Friday, a similar story. Online spending soared 22% from a year ago to $9 billion, with sales still shy of estimates. But missing forecasts for those individual days doesn't tell the whole story. Rather, it reflects a deliberate push by retailers to spread their deals out over a longer period of time. While in-store traffic dropped 37% on Black Friday from last year, every single day of the week following Thanksgiving broke online spending records. Over the course of the holidays, online sales are set to surge 30%. And with less of a focus on big marquee sales, it means consumers might have more time to find the best deals for themselves.
It took more than 7 years for e-commerce to expand from 5 to 10% of total retail sales, but COVID-19 produced that same growth in just 6 months. The question, though, is this better or worse for the environment than shopping in stores? Akshat Rathi, our Bloomberg Green reporter, joins us now. Akshat, what's the verdict on this?
In the short term, it's bad news because already our products are made from carbon-intensive processes. And then in e-commerce, you add delivery and packaging on top, which are also carbon-intensive.
So a lot of layers of carbon-intensive into this supply chain. But long-term, can it become greener?
Maybe. We know that the world's largest internet shop, Amazon, has said that it's going to cut its emissions to zero by 2040. That means it's going to have to innovate on all fronts, not just electrifying its transport, but also cleaning up packaging and coming up with innovative goods. One of the things it's promoting now is it's putting sustainability labels on products, such as using concentrated cleaning liquids, which you can just take home and then dilute with water and use through the year.
So they're getting creative. And how much of this is driven by consumer demand for those products?
It's a mix right now because the awareness of climate change, at least in the West, is going up, which means consumers are demanding that their products be greener. But we're going to require a much greater shift because this industry is so carbon intensive that there's no way to clean it up unless both retailers and customers get on board.
You mentioned the West. What's going on in Asia? What's going on in the East?
So as with many technology leaps, consumers in India and China have gone from not having telephones to having smartphones with 5G, which means they're buying more and more online. And they also tend to be less sustainability focused, which means over there, more e-commerce means more emissions.
Okay, so we have some work to do in that department. As a consumer, what is one thing I can do and keep in mind when I'm out shopping?
Well, I don't want to ruin the holiday spirit, but really, you should just shop less. That's the only way to cut emissions.
All right, shop less. That's how you cut emissions. All right, Akshat Rati, thank you so much for your time. But a green Christmas doesn't mean being a Grinch. We've put together a greener gift list for the climate conscious.
Buying stuff drives a significant chunk of global greenhouse gas emissions. High-income countries, just 16% of the world's population, are responsible for nearly half of consumption-related emissions. But it's the holidays. Sharing is a wonderful thing, and I didn't get you a present because of climate change doesn't sound very festive. There are some general guidelines to green gifting. Avoid plastic and other petrochemical-derived products. One well-made gift is much better than multiple cheap ones. And support a local business. Now, shopping in person versus ordering online would reduce emissions associated with your gift giving, but this year in the pandemic, that's not exactly advisable. So shipping mileage is also something to consider. There's no perfect way to shop. Here's a list of green-friendlier gift ideas. Hygielite's rigorous low-waste production process creates less than 1 household garbage bag per month. When you're finished burning your candle, fill up the terracotta container with dirt and plant the wildflower seeds thoughtfully included with your purchase. About half of the bamboo fiber used for the base of these containers is scrap, reclaimed from chopstick manufacturers who would otherwise throw it away. And yes, the whole thing is dishwasher safe. Chickpeas have more protein and require less water than wheat and soy, but are mostly traded locally and are largely missing from the international markets. Effie hopes to elevate these crops to create a more diverse and sustainable global food supply chain. Bonus, Effie's products ship on hybrid trucks. Each palm oil-free bar has just 8% of the carbon footprint of the equivalent liquid product. Effi's corporate office also runs on renewable energy. Instead of down feathers, Finisterre brings the warmth with its own proprietary insulation made from 100% recycled polyester. The product ships in water-soluble garment bags with no swing tags to cut down on waste. Made with Patagonian sheep's wool, Chilote slippers are handcrafted from local materials, including soles made from upcycled salmon skins. Each pair comes with a repair kit so you can extend the life of your cozies. Wild makes these cases from bamboo fibers and biodegradable plastics so you can actually compost them. The company also donates a percentage of its profits to Ocean Cleanup, an organization developing technology to stop plastic from flowing into the ocean and remove what's already there. Not only does Harvest and Mill use organic cotton in its garments, it uses multiple varieties of cotton to promote biodiversity. From seed to sock, it's all made in the U.S., cutting down on supply chain emissions. Yumi makes its water bottles from sugarcane, which captures about as much carbon dioxide as plastic production emits. Yumi also partners with nonprofit Water for Good to ensure each bottle sold provides 3 months of clean water to one person in Central Africa.
Coming up, from its simple, scanty designs to its famous meatballs, the world's largest furniture retailer is pledging to go green from top to bottom. We speak to Ikea CEO Jesper Broden. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anna-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's get your green in brief with Jennifer Zabazaja.
Here's the climate news you need to know this week. ExxonMobil is setting new ambitious targets to reduce carbon emissions. And for the first time, it also plans to disclose data on pollution related to its customers' use of fossil fuels. The oil giant says its plans are consistent with the Paris Climate Agreement. China is disappointing analysts with its new climate pledges. At a virtual meeting of world leaders, President Xi Jinping unveiled the measures that were mostly seen as incremental steps. They raise questions about China's ability to reach its pledge of being carbon neutral by 2060. Thinning ice has meant tankers have been able to travel the Arctic Ocean for longer this year. Usually the route is open from June to October. For 2020, the voyages started a month early and will continue until at least the end of December. It's a sign the pace of climate change is accelerating in the Arctic. Would you eat lab-grown meat? It's a question you might have to answer sooner than you think, with it finally starting to make the jump to the production line. Singapore has become the first country to approve the sale of the slaughter-free products. And more startups are testing faux beef and chicken. And that's your Green in Brief. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
A household name committed to going green is Europe's flat pack furniture king, Ikea. The Swedish brand, known for its simple designs, huge outlets, and iconic meatballs, is committing to be climate positive by 2030. Its plan hinges upon phasing out fossil fuels and developing products made entirely from renewable and recyclable parts. I spoke to Jesper Broden, the CEO of Ikea, which operates 378 Ikea stores in 30 markets.
The design of the plan contains everything from us encouraging second-hand as a mode of retailing, if you like, increasing quality, prolonging life length, making sure that products are designed in a way that you can break down materials in its substances afterwards. For instance, our project and investments in Netherlands that we hope to scale out is about bringing back mattresses and making new mattresses of the material and so forth. In innovation in materials, and ultimately, which is super important, that you make sure you switch towards renewable material. Everything doesn't have to be circular, but it has to be at least renewable.
Because you are so big, you actually use, I believe, 1% of all the cotton production in the world and 1% of all the timber production in the world. Do you think at some point you would scale back how much of that you're actually using, or is it more about making sure you're recycling those materials?
I would say the point which is important, which we are striving towards, is how do you actually go from the 1900s consumption model, where we were naive and where we thought that resources were endless. And you can say, to this point, from a climate perspective, we know resources are not endless. And it's also tied to the economics. If you don't find ways to build smarter resource chains, you will actually be expensive in the future. So therefore, all the modes that you described before will be important for us to be able to provide opportunities for people to fulfill their needs in life, at home, and otherwise in a way that is sustainable.
What about the drive for all of this? Who's pushing this?
I think the planet is, to be honest. But interesting enough, I would say more and more, and very soon, for those who are not in the forefront of this will realize that economics will push this. I would say today it's probably we're in between the planet and the economics, and it's I think public conscience and insights that is the main force. But the key for this is economics. It will be very difficult to stay in business for any sector if you can't find a way to be sustainable and live in harmony with the resources.
And that is because consumers just won't buy it.
Well, I would say definitely a very important part is that, and we know that from our customer surveys, which are extensive in our 30 markets, we know that people are much more concerned than you might think. And actually, if you go to Shanghai, New York, London, Stockholm, people have similar opinions and fear about it. And it's about 70% and north of that are deeply concerned. If you go down in the age groups, it's up above the 80s. So most people see a huge issue, but most people also don't really know what they can do about it and if it matters. And that is a problem that we want to address. So the consumer pressure collective is massive. And if you want to attract the best talents and co-workers, this is probably also something you want to consider. But I would say the sheer economics, if we have scarcity of material, what happens is that it's going to become more expensive, and then you will have an issue in your way of growing your business. So I am a believer also, as much as I believe this is the right thing to do, I'm a believer that economics will help speed up the work towards climate.
So initially it sounds like there's a big upfront cost, but you think down the road it's actually better economically for your bottom line by going more in the sustainability.
I would say I can prove it to a quite high degree, but there is a certain amount of faith that is needed there. Because of course, if you only look at historic data, you might wait too long with some of the investments. When we took the decision, must have been back in 2013 or somewhere around there, to phase out our incandescent lighting and just bring in 100% LED in Ikea. we actually didn't have the solution. It was at that moment far too expensive, but we made a bet and we went with faith. And today we're one of the leading companies when it is to providing lighting. We have growth and we have a good business.
Ikea is also very famous, and they're kind of iconic now, the Swedish meatballs you can get at the store. Is there a plan to make them more sustainable, to make meatballs without meat?
So I think it's a few years back we launched our veggie ball as an alternative. Today I think about 10% of our consumers use that. Typically that was easy winning of the vegetarians and vegans out there, to be honest. This is also, by the way, a good example because, of course, the veggie balls are not only healthier, but they also, of course, have a much less climate footprint. They have less than 95% is basically the improvement. So we recently launched the plant ball, which is a substitute for a meatball. And if you're blindfolded and test it, you will maybe not so easily sense the difference. This was introduced a couple of months ago and is growing as part of our business.
So you think you can achieve the same level of growth still by putting the environment as a main priority?
We will never be able to achieve our growth unless we do it. I'm absolutely convinced on that. But I think it will be very difficult for us to provide a low price and a lower price to our consumers unless we resolve this.
Coming up as 2020 comes to a close, it's been a radical year of changes, including a drastic drop in emissions. But will it last? This is Bloomberg Green.
We are supporting developing countries to help them decouple their emissions and their economic growth.
We're doing this, not because we're hair shirt wearing, tree hugging, mung bean munching eco freaks.
The choice between the bottom line and the future of our planet is a false one. And each new green innovation offers the proof.
Centennial India will not only meet its own targets, but will also exceed your expectations.
We will remain committed to making significant investments in international climate finance, because to effectively fight climate change at home, we must fight it everywhere.
Over the next 5 years, we intend to go further, targeting 35% climate co-benefits on average across the World Bank Group.
In London, I'm Amory Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. Global leaders marking their ambitions for climate investment. As 2020 comes to a close, it's time to take stock of all that's happened since the Paris Agreement and what should happen next. Our climate reporter, Jess Schenkelman, joins me for more. Jess, it's the end of the year. What's the state of play?
Well, 5 years on from Paris, we've got a lot of countries committing to zero out their emissions by 2050. The last few months in particular, we've seen China, the world's biggest emitter, commit to 2060 net zero emissions, Japan, South Korea, the UK, the European Union, and the election of Joe Biden in the US, who's promised a similar net zero target and to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Now, it's really interesting because, well, definitely back in 2015, when they were planning this 2020 stock take, I'm pretty sure they weren't expecting us to be right in the middle of a pandemic. And in March 2020, just as the virus was starting to take hold globally, it kind of looked like climate issues were going on the back burner. But actually, as we've neared the end of the year, the reverse has happened. We've had all those net zero commitments. And I think that's partly because, well, one, we've had a lot of extreme weather events globally, particularly in the US, there's been record extreme weather events. But also people have really made that link between humanity's survival and the power of nature, which, you know, the pandemic has really shown us that. So that's where we are. We've got a lot of net zero commitments, but they're all for a very, very long time away.
Yeah, exactly. These are 20, 30, 40 years away. How do we keep track that actually they are implementing these strategic changes?
Yeah, many of these leaders making these commitments today aren't going to be around, they aren't going to be leading in 2050. They aren't going to be leading in 2060. That's why we've seen a huge amount of youth movement as well, kind of people who are really saying we're the ones who are going to be having to deal with this, so make it good now. So the pressure is on countries and companies to set shorter term targets, say 2030 targets. That's what the Paris Agreement said. You have to come back in 2020 and up your ambition for 2030. And we've had some of those come forward. The UK has set a target, the EU has set a target, many of the small island nations, which are really vulnerable to the effects of climate change, they've set targets. We haven't yet seen one from China and some of the other big emitters, and obviously not the US. So that's what we're kind of waiting to see over the next year.
So that's the macro level, the leadership level. What about companies? Because I feel like 2020, my email inbox was just company after company saying what they're going to do better for the climate in the next 5-10 years. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's really exciting to see all these companies making commitments, many of them also net zero commitments. It feels like the world's got net zero-itis at the moment, but it's a similar kind of issue, like how credible, we have to really ask how credible are these targets. And when it comes to companies, you have to look at, are they just saying that they're going to reduce their emissions in their operations, maybe putting a few solar panels on their roofs, or is it a more holistic approach? Are they going to go right throughout their supply chain? If it's something like a mining company, are they also measuring the emissions of the steel that's produced, and then what that steel is even made into, and how that person drives the car that the steel is used? Scope 1, 2, and 3 in the climate world.
Exactly. So that's the kind of real rigor that people are looking for to see if those net zero emissions are credible. Net zero targets are credible. And then there's also questions about how they're meeting those targets.
So if you're going to go through Scope 3, it's very much of a structural change for a company. But we also seen companies buy a lot of these offsets. Does that work?
So the voluntary offset market, it's a bit like when you get on a plane and you tick a box on the back of the magazine saying, I'd like to pay a couple of dollars and offset my emissions. Someone will plant a tree somewhere, and that clears my conscience about this long haul flight.
But there's not been a lot of long haul flights this year.
Yeah, and exactly. So companies are trying to do a similar thing with offsetting. So what you're seeing, companies like Unilever are saying, we're not going to use offsets unless we absolutely have to, but other companies are saying they're going to rely on offsets. And we had a story this week showing that some of these offset projects, they're not necessarily offering the emissions savings that they're promising because they're protecting forests that weren't really at risk.
All right, what's in store for 2021? What's the focus this year for climate coming up?
Yeah, so there was a summit, a global leaders summit at the beginning of December. The US obviously wasn't there, and that stood out like a sore thumb. The pressure is really going to be on Joe Biden when he takes office. He's going to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and he says he's going to commit the US to net zero emissions by 2050. But he's also going to have to show political leadership and try and cajole some of those countries that are seen like kind of champion fossil fuels or climate laggards, countries like Brazil, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and try and get them on board with the climate story.
Their entire economies, some of them are built for fossil fuels. It's going to be a tough job.
Absolutely.
All right, Jess Schenkelman, our Bloomberg climate reporter, thanks so much for joining us. That does it for this week and this year of Bloomberg Green, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.